Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, final hour of today's broadcast. Joining me in studio right now, a guy who is sick and tired of going down to Austin, Texas, State Representative Chairman Dustin Burrows, representing District 83. Welcome back and congratulations.
Chad, thank you for having me on. Happy to be back. It's good to be back in Lubbock.
Well, yesterday was a big day for you as SB2 was signed into law by the governor.
Big day for taxpayers. This is the most comprehensive, significant property tax reform package in at least 40 years, if not longer. You know, there was a lot of people who deserve credit for this. The Speaker of the House, the governor for making it an emergency item, Lieutenant Governor who has, worked on it, all of my counterparts in the Senate, my colleagues in the House, and very proud of what we were able to get done.
Well, and yesterday at the bill signing, it looked like everybody was happy. What, for those who hopefully they've been paying attention, if they've been listening to the show, they should be paying attention. What does this bill actually do? Yeah,
this is a bill I worked on most of the session, something, had the privilege of getting to file and carry in the House. And really it's about voter control. It's about taxpayer control. Taxpayers are frustrated. They're upset. They feel they don't have control in the process. Their property taxes keep going up and up and up and up, and they don't feel they really have a clear understanding of who's raising their amounts by how much and how to actually get to the right place and get involved in the process. They feel they have little control. So what this bill does is it tells them who's raising their taxes and actually by dollars and cents, how much, how to get involved. We've created some mechanisms so they can actually go to websites and click a button and have engagement with their mayors and council people and say, hey, you're raising my taxes by $300-400. Why do you need this money? And start getting some feedback. That's the democratic process. And I think it really gives them the tools to do that. It also gives them an extra vote. If our cities and counties want to raise taxes over 3.5% in a given year, they're going to have to go to the voters and make their case, and the voters are going to get to either prove it or not. So this is about taxpayer control. Taxpayers had a huge win yesterday when the governor signed it into law, and very proud to have done my part to carry it.
And this does tie into what happened on the previous day with school finance reform, correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt you cannot do property tax reform if you don't do school finance reform as well, because that's a big part of the bill. And so House Bill 3, something Chairman Huberty led on, again, the House led on along with the Senate, was a major accomplishment, a major achievement, not only for taxpayers, but also for our education community. We're going to have teacher and professional pay raises out of it. We're going to have a lot of things that I think are going to improve outcomes. It is outcome-based. We're going to have efficiency audits, something a big win for conservatives. And really, there's a lot to be proud of from this session. I won't tell you it was perfect, and there's still some things that need to be done. I look forward to going back and making the case of what else needs to be done. But it's an example of what happens when a governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker work together, when they're on the same page, when Republicans are unified going into the session and working through their differences and issues throughout the session, what we can really accomplish. And I'm very proud of the leadership from all three of them this time around.
Obviously, as the bills were going through, and you have different folks who are weighing in, different groups that are weighing in and everything else. Since then, there's always the look back at the session and a look at what happened.
As there needs to be.
Yeah. And there are some out there who say, okay, great, wonderful, but it wasn't conservative enough. We spent way too much money on school finance. We spent everything that we had on school finance.
But hold on, Chad. I want to address real quick before we move on from that point. I mean, they're not actually saying that. They're saying we spent too much money. And, when you have a session where you're dealing with Hurricane Harvey, when you have a session where you're doing property tax relief, which is expensive, and you do school finance relief or school finance reform, those are expensive things. I wish anybody critical in the budget, would actually come out and say, we really wish you didn't do school finance. The House made that a priority. The Senate made it a priority. And I think that if we're going to have the debate about the spending, really what they need to be more direct is they really didn't want us to do school finance reform.
Do you think that's what it was?
I think that's what it is. It's just not, it's kind of thinly veiled.
Why, though?
Because school finance reform is popular and spending is not.
Right.
And so, I think sometimes we're conflating those two things. But we made good achievements in school finance reform. We have long overdue. It was without court order, something we prioritized, and something I think people of Texas wanted to see us be able to actually govern and lead on. And so, we did do it. It did cost money.
Is there something or anything in the bill that says, okay, we because I know you want that money to go to the classroom, you want it to go to the teachers, you want it to help the students and not to bloat administrative costs and everything else. Are there mechanisms in place to make sure that happens?
Yeah, there is, and I don't have the specific language in front of me, but it's supposed to be directed to there and not for across the board, that we're actually going to pay for experience and try to actually, pay, better teachers better, more money. And that's controversial in and of itself. The teachers' unions do not like having pay differentials, and I think that that's really an insult to some of the better teachers out there. So
I think it would encourage competition between teachers.
That's conservative.
Yeah. Visiting with Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show. I want to read you a quote, and it came out this morning because, as you know, all the mayors are now being asked about this property tax trigger that's out there, cap trigger, whatever folks want to call it. That's out there. The mayor of Austin does not like you and does not like the legislature. He has said there's no way Austin's going to bust this. They're going to go above it. The mayor of Lubbock was quoted in everythinglubbock.com. Now, here's what he said. This is his quote from everythinglubbock.com. He said, historically, that's not an issue for us. They report Mayor Pope said he's not concerned about the tax cap, doesn't know how to play out for Lubbock, though. Says, historically, that's not an issue for us. To me, I'm not sure if it's great public policy. I don't know how the state can grow their budget at 7 or 8% a year, but as cities and counties grow, theirs at 3.5%.
Well, he's factually inaccurate about historical numbers, but I won't address that. These are the same talking points Liberal Mayor Steve Adler's using, probably developed by taxpayer-funded lobbyists or anti-taxpayer lobbyists like TML. And everyone goes to a conference, and all these mayors get together, and they're spinning the same talking points. And, it's just unfortunate.
Well, okay. And so is he wrong in comparing the city budget to the state budget?
Well, this is the session where we had Hurricane Harvey and decided to do school finance reform. If the mayor's critical of school finance reform, I wish he'd just say it.
Visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the program. You mentioned taxpayer-funded lobbying groups, TML.
Texas Municipal League.
Yeah.
Our cities and mayors come together and they get on, sometimes the same talking points that are usually anti-taxpayer money, your money being used against your interests.
Right. There was a bill up for consideration in this session. It died. It would have banned taxpayer-funded lobbying. Some say it was traded. I don't know how that played out. I don't know if you want to get into that. Yeah, traded for other votes. Why did this die? Because
apparently didn't have the votes. It was something I joint authored early, something the speaker fully supported, which was why I was on major state calendar. And apparently we didn't have the votes to get it done. It was one of my greatest disappointments of the session.
The House didn't have the votes.
It died on the floor.
Yeah,
we took a record vote on it. I mean, and it went down, unfortunately. Let me tell you how this bill got started, because it's kind of an interesting story. So State Affair Chairman Dade Phelan sits next to me, or kind of catty corner to me, and he says, I understand you're going to hear House Bill 2. And I said, I am. And, of course, that's the property tax reform bill. He goes, there's been a bill filed in my committee. It's about ending taxpayer-funded lobbying. And he says, why don't we hear those bills at the same time? So some of the liberal mayors have to decide what's more important for them to testify, against property taxpayers or in support of using taxpayer dollars against them. And I said, Dade, that sounds like a good idea. Speaker said that's a great idea. And so we ended up setting these hearings at the exact same time. I ended up joint authoring that bill. Dade comes back to me, Chairman Phelan, after the hearing and says, oh, my gosh, it was extraordinary testimony. I mean, even a lot of the Democrats, that were on the committee said, this is really astounding that I don't think people realize their taxpayer dollars are being used against property tax reform, against first responders and trying to help them. And I think that when people understand this, they would want to support this bill. He goes, I'm going to move the bill. I said, let's move it and let's see what can happen. So he moved the bill. The Senate moved the bill. We came forward and, obviously we didn't do a good enough job explaining what this bill hoped to accomplish. We didn't have enough public support on the side. Sometimes bills take more than one session. I think when people start to really understand, what goes on in Austin, what their taxpayer dollars are being used for, issues that they want to see succeed, and they're being used to try to defeat those efforts, I think that they'll understand that this bill will only gain in popularity and gain in steam in future sessions.
Let's take our first break. When we come back, we will get into more of the Texas legislative session with State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM, KFYO. Representative Dustin Burrows in studio, representing District 83. After a bill signing yesterday, now hanging out back home in Lubbock. And I'm sure you're glad to be back here in Lubbock, aren't you?
I am. Towards the end of session, my wife told me my almost 3-year-old, my youngest, started referring to me as Dustin instead of Dad, which is, I knew I needed to come home and be a dad for a bit.
Yeah,
and we're back to Dad, so that's a good thing.
That's good. That's good. I want to ask you, going back to the property tax issue,
Yes.
a couple of more questions. There was a story that came out, I believe it was Austin American Statesman yesterday. There was Mayor of Round Rock. Who said, well, if we're not going to be able to, increase taxes, we'll look at fees. We'll look at doing fees. And it was sort of tongue in cheek, sort of serious, had said that get ready because cities are going to impose a wind fee. They're going to look at other, this, governments want to keep raising money. And especially when you're looking at Austin, when you're looking at liberal governments, they want to keep bringing in that money. The lieutenant governor yesterday, I believe it was at the bill signing, said, if they try to circumvent us, we'll be back in a couple of years.
Well, yeah, and one of the things I'm most concerned about being circumvented by is how we calculate non-voter approved debt, such as certificates of obligation. This was something that I tried to address and didn't get the requisite support, where we basically say COs are treated like voter-approved debt, and they don't calculate towards the rollback rate or now the voter-approved rate calculation. Very technical, wonky stuff, but there's ways around it, and we're going to continue to have to monitor and see what happens. And I look forward to working with the Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, Senators, and everybody else to watch what's really going on this and making sure we have the right policy because, again, it's about the taxpayers and giving them, more control over a process they feel they have little control over. And I do want to dovetail back real quick to the taxpayer-funded lobbying thing, just to make sure it's clear. My biggest concern is I just want the people of, Lubbock and Texas to know and have a better sense on sometimes what their tax dollars are being spent on, whether it's, testifying against Senate Bill 2 or testifying against, firefighters with cancer, something I spent a lot of session trying to add some protections on. Maybe people are comfortable with it. Obviously, we had a vote on the floor and, that's representative of government, and that's what people are comfortable with them having a voice. But I just want people to know what's really going on. Before I was representative, I had no clue, about, Texas Municipal League and Texas Association of Counties and these groups that your taxpayer dollars largely support and how that's being spent. And we need to find the balance. And I think that over the interim, we need to continue to just have the debate and figure out, what is the right metric, what is the right accountability, what's the right transparency piece, and kind of flesh it out in the public forum so that when we come back, we find out where people are. I think this was something that maybe, wasn't fully known when we got in and wasn't fully developed, and I'm going to continue to have the conversation just so people know and we can have a good public debate on it.
Visiting with Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show, I want to ask you something about the Speaker. And there's been a lot of talk about the Speaker, and I'm not going to ask you, to answer for, all the comments that he has made. But I will say this: one thing that I appreciate about Speaker Bonin is that you usually know where he stands on things. He's come on this show a couple of different times, and he's vocal. He's vocal about and when it came to school finance. He was very vocal about that. It's
called leadership,
right?
Yeah.
On taxpayer funded lobbying. I didn't hear him speak out much about that or put pressure on folks. Did he? Was he doing that maybe behind the scenes and it just didn't take off? Or how does that work where he picks and chooses what issue to press?
Well, look, there's obviously issues that he pressed, such as school finance reform, property tax reform, but the fact that bill, went down on a point of order in the House, came back up quickly and ended up on major state, you don't have to look to his words or comments to realize that it was a bill that, obviously had some supportive leadership, going forward. You also saw the Chair of Ways and Means and Chair of State Affairs join author the bill and work on it and push on it. And, it was an important bill to a lot of us, and I think the conversation will be to be continued.
Yeah. Okay. Another comment or another debate point that has broken out since the session regarding Speaker Bonin is that he basically, I think he sent a warning out to members not to campaign against each other and there was a news article that there would be retribution if members of the House campaigned against each other or if Republicans came out against Democrats. Was that characterized in the wrong way? What's going on there? Because I've had some who have been very upset about that.
So, look, the Speaker actually is candid and honest and says a lot of things that are just the truth. I mean, this is the unwritten rule of the House, always has been. We don't actively, show up in other members' districts and campaign against them. There's something that's been a tradition, well before Speaker Bonin came into power, before Joe Strauss, under Speaker Craddock, as I understand it, and just is what it is. And we saw a lot of typically Democrats get in during the absence of a speaker this last time against some of our Republican colleagues. And I think he sent a warning shot across the bow to some of them, which is, don't go into other members' districts and knock on their doors. I will not appreciate it and do it. Does the speaker want to retain a Republican majority and come back and be speaker? Absolutely. There is no doubt. Every action that he took during session and since session is to try to preserve a Republican majority in Texas. And it's so crucial this time around. We're heading into redistricting. And the House is, I don't want it to be in play, but after the last election cycle, I think we're all focused on it. And the people who are complaining the loudest about some of his comments are the ones that I worry the most, that are trying to do their best to defeat us, maybe accidentally, maybe unintentionally, in 2020.
Do you think that the speaker will get involved, maybe not in House races, but in promoting the Republican agenda, not in the legislature, but during the election?
Look, the speaker has been at bill signings for property tax reform, something that's going to be popular not only in primaries, but extraordinarily popular, in my opinion, in 2020 general election. Same as school finance reform. He has been vocal about it. He's been out front about it, and he is a great spokesman for what we have accomplished and what we want to continue to accomplish. And I think that, him being out in front and doing that is going to be a boon for us coming back, in November 2020.
Yeah, there were some, and I know I told you I'm not going to ask you to answer for everything that the speaker has said, but we do have a couple of more minutes here. And he paid Joe Moody, Representative Joe Moody, who was Speaker Pro Tem, Democrat out of El Paso, paid him a pretty good compliment after the session. We've had Joe Moody here on the show, Texas Tech grad, and he said that if the Democrats took the House, that to the effect that Joe Moody would be a good speaker candidate. Is that? What did he mean by that? And there were some who got offended by that, Representative Burrows.
Look, it's kind of like choosing which way to tax people is the least bad option. We're hoping that, the Democrats do not take over the House, but we're going to play the game of hypotheticals. Certainly, you want, you would hope that it's somebody that you actually like more than somebody that's a radical progressive on the left that actually does it.
There are a few out there.
And there is definitely some out there. And you look especially at the National Party and the way it's trending. And, the Democratic Party is vastly becoming radical and progressive. Yeah. And so, I think, again, we have a speaker that is candid, is willing to basically say what he says out front, what he says behind closed doors. And, a snippet of that conversation, maybe a little out of context, got put, in there. But I can tell you from all my interactions with him and knowing him personally, he's fully committed to Republicans retaining the majority coming back into 2020.
All right. We're not done with our conversation with Representative Dustin Burrows. We've got still some tax stuff to get into, and we got to find out how the vet school, how that big win happened, and a few other big issues of the day as well with Chairman Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show. Chad Hasty Show News Talk, KFYO. Chairman Dustin Burrows in studio with us as we continue our wrap-up. Maybe not a complete wrap-up, but at least, part one wrap-up. Of the legislative session.
We've got multiple shows as long as you keep inviting me back to try to unpackage all of the things that were accomplished and need to still be accomplished from this last session.
Yeah, and there are things left over, and I want to get to the vet school here in a little bit because I think that's going to be very interesting how that all unfolded. A big win for Lubbock, for West Texas, for Amarillo. I want to ask you. You brought up, and this is a question that I keep getting from folks. Property tax relief. At the very beginning of the session, we kept on hearing relief. There were a lot of folks, and I'm sure you've heard from people that have said, "Where is the big property tax relief?" Y'all had brought the governor, speaker, and lieutenant governor had a plan about halfway through the session of doing a sales tax swap. That died. What happened to significant property tax relief? Where does that come in?
So there's no doubt that the combination of House Bill or Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3 will provide future relief over what would have been when you put the increases limits on schools of 2.5 and 3.5. And you may not feel it immediately, but over time it will drive it down, and that is significant. I would have liked to have actually dedicated more than $5 billion to property tax relief. That's what we actually did this session. That's significant. We have not done that before. We also dealt with recapture for our mineral wealthy districts. That is huge. In order to have sustainable sources of driving down more property tax, more property taxes, the idea during the middle of session was, let's give voters the option. Would you rather have a consumption tax or a property tax? And we'll let you all decide. Personally, my family, most people I know, don't like either one. We don't like taxes, but if we're going to have a tax, we have more control over a consumption tax, especially when you look at what goods are excluded out of it, especially essential items. We'll continue to have that debate about people's preferences of paying for the things that we agree need to be paid for.
Will that be a big campaign issue? Is the sales tax swap idea still alive?
I think there's going to be some other ideas. Talk to me in about August or September. I'm going to tip my hand just a little bit. We're going to have some interim charges. If you'll remember, prior to this session, I'd never been on Ways Means Committee, much less chaired it.
Yeah.
I actually have the opportunity now under the speaker, to get a little more prepared and to talk about things. I've had some really good conversations with colleagues and people that I respect about some ideas of doing even more significant things in the future. And when interim charges come out and we start going forward with that, I'm going to tell you some of my ideas and some of the things that we need to go through. See, public policy is not made in a vacuum. It's not made overnight with, a spark and all of a sudden it gets done. It's a conversation with constituents and people and voters across not only your region, the entire state, and other constituents and parties. And the conversations that we begin during the interim will be what define the next session. And we just ended this session. It's kind of a post-mortem analysis, what we're doing. And as we get geared back up for election season and asking people to trust us with the vote and what we seek to accomplish, we'll make that transition and start to have that publicly policy debate about what we intend to do. And property tax, more significant relief, I believe, will be part of it.
The sales tax swap idea, it was announced during the middle of session. It caught the public by surprise. Was it discussed leading up to the session and at the very beginning of the session?
Well, see, again, I wasn't Ways and Means Chair leading up to the session, and so I wouldn't be part of those conversations. I can tell you that, the idea of giving people the option to drive down property taxes even further was something we all wanted to do. We all want even more significant property tax relief. I mean, especially hearing the pain. And this is not a, theoretical debate. This is a real thing for businesses and people that are struggling, to do this. We heard from a small business owner in Austin yesterday whose property taxes went up 44% overnight. And this is, he's trying to have a multi-generational hamburger stand. The margins on that business are not big enough to cover it. And so these are real pains. This is real hurt. And we need to continue to look at it and work on it. And I think a lot of options will be on the table as we have this debate.
Moving forward, what is reasonable property tax relief when people look at their bills? And we asked a question, obviously very informal poll here on KFYO. We asked people, what would you consider significant tax relief? And they said $500 to $1,000 plus off their property tax bill. Is that reasonable?
Well, reasonable is obviously a very subjective term. What I will tell you is we put $5 billion into actually reducing people's property taxes this time around, some more money in for recapture. That is significant by comparison to previous sessions. There was certainly a commitment to doing that. And, I will continue to be an advocate for even, continuing that commitment and even greater commitment, especially as we now have some mechanisms in place to slow the growth of it over time. And that is significant to slow the growth. That is a significant achievement. We've spent over 40 years trying to do something like this. And this is the first time we were able to get it done. Do I hope for more in the future? Absolutely. We're never satisfied. But that being said, I do think we need to take a moment to at least be proud of some of the things that we had to work hard and fought for to accomplish this last session.
One of those things that you can be proud of is the Texas Tech Vet School. That got approved. And this was a big fight to get the right language in and the right language adopted, because the Senate, in my opinion, had a language attached to their version of the funding. One, their funding was much lower than the House's initial funding for the vet school. They also had language in there that would have tied it to the Board of Higher Education. The House, you guys, listen, y'all came through when it came to the funding. You got the Senate on board. How did all of this come together for the Tech Vet School?
That's a long story. But look, I mean, we're talking about things that, the people of Texas and West Texas have wanted for a very, very long time. We've been fighting for a vet school for generations. Yeah. And the work was started, and we have champions, such as, Chancellor Duncan and Hance and Kurt Mitchell and people who fought very hard for this. And I felt very blessed and lucky to be in a position to, work with Chairman Forprice and John Frullo and Senator Perry and all of the people, in the delegation to actually bring this home this time. And, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes fighting, some things that probably deserve to stay behind the scenes, but ultimately everybody did their part, and the House and the Senate agreed, to fully fund a vet school and to make this a priority for West Texas. And it's a long time overdue, and something I'm proud to have played a role in being, getting done.
Let's see. I want to bring you back for one more segment as we close out the show. But before we take our first break, tell us about a new law that was signed off by the governor, I believe, just a few days ago, that helps out firefighters here in Texas.
This was a priority of mine going into session. I filed some bills that got the attention of the cities. We found out that firefighters, they're prone to smoke inhalation and developing some, forms of cancer. And there was a lot of studies, some from the World Trade Center and others, that show that on-the-job cancer is a leading cause of death among firefighters. But yet, when they applied for their workers' compensation benefits, I think 89% were automatically denied. It was embarrassing, unacceptable, and certainly something I, with some of my House colleagues, wanted to lead on to change. We ended up getting Senate Bill 2551, Senator Chuy Hinojosa. We got it from the Senate side. It kind of got stuck and stymied in the House, but came together, and I'm extraordinarily proud of it, because when you meet the firefighters, some here locally, and they could really tell their stories, it's just a privilege to represent them and to get to do something for them, to make sure that it's presumed when they develop these rare forms of cancer that they are on the job, so that they get the benefits, the health care treatment that they deserve, that their families are taken care of when they pass away from putting their lives on for the lines for us, and just something that was very meaningful and significant, and will really help out in the grand scheme of things. And by the way, something that taxpayer dollars were used to testify against.
Really?
Yes.
When we come back, we'll have our final segment with Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, KFYO. Back on the Chad Hasty Show as we wrap up today's edition of the program, and we are beginning to wrap up and, I guess, unpack, as Chairman Burrows put it, the Texas legislative session. There's still one issue out there, Burrows, that people are still wondering what's going to happen, and that's the plumbers. The governor has said that he's going to come in and he's going to be able to do something. We still don't know what the governor is going to do, but the plumbers, what was it? The plumbers board was sunset, and the governor is going to come in and do something.
So this was an issue that I don't think any of us expected it to quite end like this, to be real honest with you.
Yeah, it seems like that.
My understanding is the Plumbers Board, as it currently sat, was really underperforming and underwhelming as far as approving applications and doing things. And the feeling of a lot of my Republican colleagues in Sunset was, look, it needed to be moved under TDLR with a lot of other trades because we needed to have better servicing. A lot of plumbers groups didn't like that. There was some cross things at the end. And as of right now, they are sunsetted. And so we are looking at a situation that plumbers would be unlicensed, unregulated. I don't think that's a great idea by any means, but the governor has said he's going to come in and make sure that doesn't happen. And he's a smart guy. He was the former attorney general. I have a lot of respect for our governor and support him trying to do something.
Are you okay with the governor doing something without the approval of the legislature? Because if an organization was sunset, couldn't you make the argument that that was the will of the legislature?
You are asking me to speculate about something I don't know the plan of yet, and I'm going to decline to speculate until I know.
So you don't know what the plan is.
I've spent some time recently with the governor signing property tax reform, visited about some other ideas. Again, I have tremendous respect, and I mean that with the utmost sincerity for our governor, his ability to deal with complicated issues and lead, and I look forward to him coming up with a solution for this.
Tell us in the time that we have left about the future of I-27.
Yeah, so this was a bill I had filed last session, and Chairman Ford Price filed this session. His bill was to have a study, which is kind of the next step to extend I-27 northwards. I've put an amendment on to study actually going south as well, and hopefully this is continuing the conversation of a Port to Plains highway and roads and economic development on this side of Texas, and looking forward to seeing where that gets us. I think it's got a lot of good opportunity and a lot of success, and sometimes we're overlooked, and I'm glad that we had some achievement this session and progress on it.
There are always bills that obviously don't get a lot of attention, and you could probably make the argument that the firefighters bill that you discussed earlier, that did not get a lot of attention in this session. Were there any other pieces of legislation that to you should have gotten more attention, or are important bills that just, where we were all focused on property tax and everything else, Chairman Burrows? Is anything else that you think that people need to know? This is something that happened that is a big deal.
I mean, there's a lot of bills that I am very proud of, and we can go back through, and unpackage a lot of them. For small businesses, and we didn't talk a lot about this, but they're having the bricks and mortar are having to compete with online companies. And they really feel it's unfair that a lot of them don't pay sales taxes, and they're having an unfair competitive advantage against California-based companies. I filed the bill. Senator Nelson carried it in the Senate after the Wayfair decision to try to equalize that, to make sure that there's no loopholes for California-based companies. I tried to do the same thing for hotels and online rental cars, and we didn't get success there. But I think that those are some of the things that may get in the weeds, but you go talk to any small retailer, anybody who's competing, and they realize that California companies aren't paying their fair share or any sales tax, in fact, and they're happy to see some of this getting equalized, and so proud to kind of work on that. And there's just a lot of things that we did and moved, and I can go through and get a list, and we can talk to anyone about any one of them. But there's a lot we did, and a lot that still needs to be done.
Would you say, if you had to put a grade on this session, how would you grade it?
High marks, especially in the area of being pro-taxpayer, especially in the area of things that I want to see accomplished for West Texas. I think West Texas had a lot of leadership roles. We had a lot of influence on a lot of parts of the process, and so very excited that we were able to make our mark. I mean, it's 140 days. Most of it really gets done in about 60-day period of time. I'm still very happy that we meet every 2 years, because I think that sometimes not being able to do everything is not necessarily a bad thing, and it's served Texas well. But we made a lot of stride and a lot of proud. And what I'm most proud of, and this is something I hadn't experienced, is watching our governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker working together. Getting together and saying property tax reform, school finance reform, school safety, something we haven't really spoken about. Doing some really big things in those areas were going to be priorities of all three of them, and them continuing to herd 181 votes and members together that in representative democracy, representative government, to get together to actually accomplish that. And we made historic gains. Was it perfect? No, but I don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good.
Yeah. Dustin Burrows, State Representative for District 83, as always. We appreciate your time.
Chad, thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on.